Ayubowan. So we welcome you to the second episode of our defense podcast with Nilan. And today we are going to talk about an exciting subject, which is of biowarfare. So biowarfare today has immense focus as well as a danger that poses to many countries around the world, including us maybe. So that's what we are talking about. What are the latest developments of biowarfare? How we can protect ourselves from a biological attack? What types of attacks are there? So those almost all of the technicalities we are going to discuss today. So Nilan is here with me on the other side. So I'm going to get him in now. Hi Nilan.
Hi, good evening. It's great to see you. And so, before we start, I need to commend you and your audience for all the positive comments that we've received, because
Yeah.
what it shows me is that your audience is interested in the nuance and the technical side of these conversations as well. Often, many people simply just want to hear the surface level stuff without getting into the contradictions and the nuances and the technical side of it. And the fact that your audience was very receptive to that is very encouraging to somebody like me, right? So thank you to you, and thank you to your audience as well.
So you guys have been amazing. I have seen a lot of positive comments that you wanted to continue this discussion series, and as he knows now, he has felt that we are all in type of a similar mindset to dwell down into all these technicalities and find out the science behind this rather than getting some surface knowledge. So he has been doing a lot of talks in TVs and newspapers, and most of his concerns has reached to a wider audience. But our audience in my channel, you guys, are mostly interested about the technicalities as well as how these things actually work, what are the implications and comparisons with the various kinds of technologies. So keep that spirit up. That is the audience that I want to build. That is the community that I want to build, and through that we will create a generation where they are really interested in STEM related subjects. So coming back to the main topic today, we are talking about biowarfare. Uh, I want to confirm with you something else as well before we go into that topic. So sometimes when you take, let's say, a foreign military expert from US, for example, let's say they worked in CIA or some other military branch, and they after retirement they come into podcast. So sometimes while they are in the service, they also come into the various podcasts and news items. And sometimes when presented with a question, they say, "Okay, this part I cannot talk about. I don't have the authority to talk about it. We can talk about this part." So they basically say that they have something to hide or they cannot disclose something. But what I'm asking you is, since you are involved with our military, do you have areas that you cannot cover on our podcast, or do you hide some information from us? What's the
Fortunately, I'm in a position where I can say what I want about anything that I want. I
I
think
can
so.
hear you.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Perfect. So I was saying, so in terms of military technology, thankfully I can share all my knowledge with you. I'm not too sure how useful that knowledge would be if you're looking for extremely confidential stuff. But whatever I know, I will certainly share with you
So
and
you're
your
not
audience.
bound by any contract, right?
No, I can say what I want. Thankfully, yeah.
Great. Okay, so biowarfare is our main topic today. So why did you select biowarfare to discuss today? Because we have been talking about at the very end of the last podcast that we are going to talk about fifth generation jets, and I told you that we will keep that topic when we physically meet, right? So we are going to physically meet in our actual studio. So that would be a much more engaging conversation. And since this is a new subject, I wanted to lay the groundwork regarding biowarfare on an online session. So let's delve into it. We had a little bit of a discussion prior to the recording. So you said that biowarfare is something that has been happening for over 5,000 years. So let's start from the historical aspect and then come to the modern times. In the history, I have heard that there were wars where they used these catapults to get some pig carcasses with some deadly strains of viruses and diseases, and they just catapult them over the defensive wall, and it lands on the other side of the city. So is that the start of biowarfare?
So that is actually the middle. So you see
Ah.
that during the Middle Ages and all that, the guys who pioneered that were the Mongols. The
Mm.
Mongols, when they would lay siege to a fortress, because they were a hunter-gatherer, nomadic horse-riding society, they could defeat anybody on an open field. But
Mm.
with some of these fortifications, it was difficult for them to breach because they didn't have heavy artillery and all that at that time. So what they used to do is they would catapult corpses with not just pigs, human corpses as well, knowing that the population that was trapped inside, the more you bombarded them with all of this stuff, the more disease and all that would spread inside these closed in fortresses. So the Mongols
These
perfected
were
that.
rotten pig carcasses, no? Rotten animal carcasses and
Yeah,
even human bodies.
or human carcasses that were infected with like the Black Plague, the Black Death
Mm.
was this famous, the bubonic plague, killed about half the population of Europe, killed about 500 million people overall around the world, when the world population itself was only about twice that, right? So,
So half the world population dead?
yeah, half the European population and something like one third of the overall world's population died in the space of about 200 years because of the Black Death, the bubonic plague. So what we would still call the plague today in some parts of the world. So yeah, it starts off. We can go back, in fact, to the ancient Romans, the ancient Scythians. We could go back to Kautilya in India, who was about 2,500 years old when he wrote this major book on statecraft called the Arthashastra. I actually almost did
Just
an
hold on
article.
right there. අර්ථශාස්ත්‍ර අපි අර පොඩ්කාස්ට් එක අපේ ඩොක්ටර් විජේවර්ධන පොඩ්කාස්ට් එක අපි මේක ගැන කතා කරනවා අර්ථශාස්ත්‍රය කියන පොත මොකක්ද ඒක ගැන අපි මොනවද බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ කියලා මොනවද ඉගෙන ගන්න පුළුවන් විශේෂයෙන්ම රාජ්‍ය පාලනයට. So this book called Arthashastra, right? So this
Yes.
book we have discussed is basically an economist guidebook as well as leadership book, where everyone who's thinking of entering politics or running a country, it's useful for everyone, but especially for those two categories, they have to read that book because that contains a wealth of knowledge and wisdom. So we have discussed about this in extensive detail in our previous podcast, which we have done with Dr. Vijayvardhan. Okay, you can go on.
Yeah, so I'm glad you said that, because whenever people talk about Kautilya and the Arthashastra, that's what they say: economics, statecraft, diplomacy, governance. But in that collection of books which make up the Arthashastra treatise, there's one which is book number 14, which nobody talks about for some reason. I wanted to write an article about it for Harvard. I might write it sometime early next year. That book 14 is called Biological Warfare.
Damn, really?
Yeah. So there's an
See,
entire
so
chapter.
he only talked about biological warfare or entire military strategy?
So there's a lot of military strategy in the governance part and the diplomacy part and all that. So there's a lot of military strategy in the book, in the treatise overall, which is a collection of many different books. But book 14 specifically focuses on biological warfare. Right? So how do you make different types of poisons? How do you use different types of animals? So for example, he advocates one of these tactics where you set birds on fire and you then send them flying into the enemy's territory. So that would be an ancient form of
That is very
biological.
ruthless, no?
Yeah. So, but if you look at most of the tactics of the Arthashastra, they focus a lot more on effectiveness than compassion. So he lists out way concoctions in which you can have what's called biting disease, which today we would call rabies. He comes up with all kinds of tactics on the use of poisons. How do you make certain types of poisons? Where, in what situations you should use certain types of poisons and all that. There's an entire category table that you can create based on book 14 itself. So that's another ancient. The ancient Romans used to bombard people with scorpions. So they would load up crates full of scorpions and they would call them scorpion bombs, and they would then catapult them. There was this famous general Hun called Hannibal. I'm sure many of you would have heard of now Hannibal.
Attila the Hun, we have Attila, no,
Yeah,
Attila.
so Attila the Hun is related to Hannibal as well. So they crossed the Alps and stuff like that. So one of Hannibal's most famous naval victories was by catapulting snakes boxes full of venomous snakes onto the ships of the enemies. And what
So how
Hannibal
are they able to target that? I mean, ship is a very small target when you consider the vast ocean. So how are you going to able to target a specific surface on a vast ocean from a distance? What are the technologies did they have to do that?
no, they just had basic, it was just sheer quantity. The fleet would, because there would be direct naval engagements, and these guys are not, because this is before the days of heavy artillery and all that. Those days, the ships would
They
have,
came very close.
yeah, and you would have to board the ship and all that. So
Okay.
you would just bombard them with this until some of them land. And Hannibal realized also the psychological impact of biological warfare. It wasn't just the fact that these poisonous snakes would bite you. It was the fact that all these sailors who had been stuck on a boat for months and months would freak out at the sheer sight of the entire deck now crawling with poisonous snakes. And that's how he won that as well. You can go back to, some of the ancient Roman examples that I gave you, like scorpions,
Are there any
poisonous.
prehistoric examples as well where they used to coat the arrowhead with some poison? Does
I
that
was just
count
going
as
to say,
biowarfare?
yeah. So prehistoric, what they would do is they would either plunge the arrow in feces, as in shit, because even prehistoric man knew that if you were around shit for too long, people tend to get sick. So there must be something wrong in this. So they would dip it in that, in corpses, in feces, and all that before they fire. I would say an interesting example of tribal fighting, which had warfare, is pulling out toxins from frogs. Like the South Americans, for example, if you've seen the movie Apocalypto and all that, some of these poisonous frogs, they used to use the venomous coating on its body itself, on the dart or the arrow tip or whatever, and they would then use that as poisoned projectiles. So yeah, so this goes back to prehistoric times as well.
Okay, so when we come to modern times, now we are worried about, a lot of countries are worried about biowarfare. We have heard this term, I have heard this term for last 20 years, and throughout history it has come up, and even some electric cars are now designed, even Teslas, they say that we are safe against chemical and biological attacks. So who does biological attacks? Are there any examples? Why are we trying to get ourselves covered? I mean, get ourselves to a safe location and get ourselves some sort of an insurance against that. Why is the talk available in the society about this?
Okay, so the problem comes from what's known as the 1972 Biowarfare Convention, where many countries, so almost like 190 countries or something, are a party to this convention today,
Okay.
which bans the offensive use of biological weapons.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the treaty does not ban defensive applications and defensive development of biological weapons. So
Okay, hold
even
on.
though,
Why was there a need for such a treaty? Was there any incidents that led to it?
yeah, so in World War II, the Japanese very rampantly used biological warfare against the Koreans and the Chinese. For example, the Japanese dropped millions of fleas with plague.
CAD කියන එක computer aided drawings කියන එක කොහොමද පරිණාමය වුණේ කම්මැලියට එකට එකතු වෙලා AutoCAD කියන software හදා ගන්නවා මොන වගේ professionals ලටද මේ AutoCAD කියන software එක use වෙන්නේ ඔයගොල්ලෝ මම ඔය කියපු fields වල වැඩ කරනවා නම් ඕගොල්ලන්ට අනිවාර්යෙන්ම මේ AutoCAD කියන software එක use කරන්න සිද්ධ වෙනවා මේ AutoCAD කියන software එක පාවිච්චි කරලා මොන වගේ දේවල්ද කරන්නේ මේ තියෙන software එකේ user interface මේකට කියනවා ground floor plan එක මේක first floor plan එක මේ front elevation එක මේ side elevation එක මේ section එක දැන් හිතන්න මේක මාර අමාරු වැඩක් කියලා හිතේ අපෝ නෑ බලන්න මෙතන තියෙන්නේ ඉරි round සහ අකුරු විතරයිනේ ඔයාලට මේ ටික හරියට අඳගන්න පුළුවන් නම් ඔයාලට ඕනෙම දෙයක් AutoCAD වලින් අඳින්න පුළුවන්. ඒක තමයි ඔයාලා මේ කෝස් එක කරන එකේ වැදගත්කම වෙන්නේ. AutoCAD පාවිච්චි කරලා කීයක් අපිට හම්බ කරන්න පුළුවන්ද? Revit software එක දන්නවා නම් ඔයාට පුළුවන් ඔයාගේ අය කිරීම කෙලින්ම 10 ගුණකින් වැඩි කරන්න. මේ තියෙන අපේ elearning.lk එකේ Revit පාඨමාලාව Revit දන්නවා නම් මතකද ගන්න Revit කෝස් එක කළාම ඔයාලට හම්බ වෙනවා digital certificate එකක්. AutoCAD සහ Revit කියන දෙකම දන්නවා නම් මාසක ඩොලර් 2000ක් කිසිම ගැටලුවක් නැතුව ඔයාලට earn කරන්න පුළුවන්. සියලුම දැනුම මේකෙන් ලබා දෙනවා. ඒ හින්දා පෙර දැනුමක් අවශ්‍ය වෙන්නේ නැහැ.
on the Chinese population. So instead of dropping missiles, they would drop fleas, like all these small insects that were infested with the plague, and they used that to spread disease. And even before that, you had the 1925 Geneva Convention, which basically said biological weapons cannot be used, because by the time we got to the Industrial Revolution, there seems to have been this unanimous agreement, unwritten agreement, that biological warfare was something very evil. In fact, even if we look at it historically, most kingdoms have been quite reserved in their use of biological warfare, where they have only used it very tactically because of the practical difficulties, right? Number one, you can't control it. Most biological attacks,
I mean,
once
collateral. It can do collateral damage. You can damage yourself.
you can damage yourself, you can perpetuate the damage even longer than you expected. It can get your victory itself might become meaningless if the place that you're conquering is just a disease-ridden hellhole where everybody is dying. Then that makes your victory itself meaningless. So, for practical reasons and for some moral reasons, over the years we have started going away from biological warfare. In 1972 was when we had a proper international convention banning this. However, because defensive uses were not banned, almost every militarily powerful country today has a bioweapons program. It might not be offensive, where they might
How
mostly
to
be.
distinguish between offensive and defensive engagements?
So, for example, a defensive training program would be something like what India has, where the Indian military since 1998 has been training evacuations. So, for instance, what would happen if there's a biological attack in location X? How exactly would we evacuate the civilians from there? What exactly would we do to contain the attack and stuff like that? Now, countries like the United States and Russia and all that, their position is, oh, for us to defend against it, we of course need to research all this as well. We need to make sure that we have all the.
So there's a loophole in the agreement.
Yeah, the entire agreement becomes meaningless because of that. So a Sri Lanka or a Burkina Faso or a Fiji or something like that can be prevented from using or tampering or researching with biological warfare using this convention. But a United States or Russia can easily use that loophole to have their own biowarfare programs.
What if we use the same loophole?
We can use the same loophole, but once again, it's much easier to punish us through international sanctions and all that than to punish a permanent member of the Security Council. As you know, the international community can do a lot more to pressure us, while it can do nothing to pressure the Americans.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to establish the distinction between biological warfare and the chemical warfare elements. So what's the distinction?
Okay, perfect. So a biological weapon is anything that uses living matter. So it has to either come from a living creature, or you should be using a living creature itself. So, for example, a fungus, an insect, some kind
fungus
of
is considered a living creature.
Yeah, a fungus would be a living creature, yes, because fungi grow and they feed off the nutrients of that and all that. I mean, like a fungus, a plant, an animal, all of these things would be considered living matter. So that, whereas these chemical toxins would be considered chemical warfare. So if the agent is an actual living organism or made from active living matter, made out of living cells, we would call that a biological attack. If it's a chemically produced weapon, we would call it a chemical weapon.
Okay. In that case, if we are to create something inside a lab that could be considered as an artificial biological agent, would that still be biowarfare or chemical warfare?
So this is where many countries are now trying to create genetically modified and genetically altered diseases to escape that loophole.
Oh,
right? So it's a gray area, right? So obviously, when these new technological revolutions come up, it's a gray area. So with artificial stuff and all that, no lawyer right now can give you an opinion because it hasn't gone to a proper court yet where some international criminal court can deliver a ruling and all that. Right now, the distinction is that if it uses biological agents, it's biological warfare. If it uses chemical agents, it's chemical warfare. But as you said, those distinctions, how long will they remain relevant? We really don't know.
Is that what happened in Wuhan?
I mean, look, Wuhan is an even bigger Pandora's box than UFOs. But ultimately, look, I think everybody knows that there was indeed a research facility in Wuhan, and there were indeed many attempts made to weaponize certain bacteria and virus and all that in such labs. So once again, I am not too sure which of the, was it intentionally leaked with the motive to weaponize it? Was it accidentally leaked? Was it a coincidence? I'm not too sure, but it's true that there was a lab in Wuhan, and it's absolutely true that this lab was experimenting on the weaponization of disease.
Okay. Okay, so 1977 treaty, right? 1977, is it?
1972.
1972. So let's talk from there onwards now. What happened in the treaty? So they have established a treaty that you cannot use it for offense, but you can use it for defense, and countries have found the loophole. So from there onwards, what are the developments?
So on that onwards, like with all treaties, the treaty only applies to the weak and not really to the rich. So the Americans,
apart from the nuclear proliferation.
I mean, but even the nuclear proliferation treaty, if so, the United States now through the AUKUS agreement, right? If they choose to equip Australia with nuclear submarines, who's going to stop them? When Russia put nuclear missiles on Cuba, leading to the Cuban Missile Crisis, who was able to stop them? It was a confrontation between the Russians and the Americans, and the rest of us just had to cross off. The rest of them who were born back then just had to cross their fingers and wait it out. So even with the non-proliferation,
but as far as I know, I have seen statistics that at least 2/3 of the nuclear arsenal has been reduced on those countries, right?
so there has been a reduction because they too know that having these large nuclear stockpiles is not going to be of much use, because the future use of nuclear weapons is going to be portable nukes anyway. It's not going to be these large nukes that are meant to destroy an entire country and all that, right? But ultimately, I can't think of a single treaty in the world that either the United States or Russia can be punished for if they choose to break that treaty, right? I am personally not aware, because a mechanism to control them doesn't exist.
So, in a very distant sense, we have to blame Hitler for that, right?
I mean, you could blame Hitler, or you could just blame the United Nations, which most people don't want to do. The United Nations is more or less a way for the winners of the Second World War to remain the most powerful nations in the world. And that's essentially what we see the UN functioning as. It's kind of like where you have the mafia, but there would be like a bakery or a restaurant or a massage parlor or something like that as the front office while all of this happened. So if we were to study, I mean, we can do an entire conversation
Episode
on
on
that
this,
as well.
yes.
If we were to look at the 85-year history of the United Nations, its only function to perpetuate and protect the interests of the permanent members rather than to do anything meaningful in terms of holding anybody accountable and all that. As if you're Liberia or Burkina Faso or Sudan or something like that, the international community might get together to punish you. But if you're anybody with any kind of real power, you get away scot-free.
What happened in Burkina Faso? It's a very unique name that I heard in a while.
Yeah. So one of these days we'll do like a sub-Saharan African conflict chart. So Burkina Faso had a huge civil conflict there.
Is it a country or a city?
It's a country. Burkina Faso is a separate country in the sub-Saharan
Is it a new
African.
country?
No, it's existed for quite a while. It's not. Most of those countries are relatively new
Anyway,
in that none of them are civilizational countries and all that. But yeah, so many of those countries now, they are the ones at risk of being taken to the International Criminal Court and all that. You're not really going to see the 5 permanent members of the Security Council worrying about the International Criminal Court or UN peacekeeping missions and all that at any point of time. These are things that we use only to bludgeon the weak and never to restrain the strong.
Okay, okay. Before we go into the main topic again, I have to just ask one thing. So India is not one of these main 5 countries still, but they
Yeah.
want a seat at the table, right?
Yeah, India was actually offered the permanent
Ah.
seat. I think it was in 1953 or so. And then Nehru, unfortunately, made a strategic blunder by
Mhm.
saying, no, 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 China is the natural leader of this region. And therefore, it should go to China. Yeah, see, Nehru's foreign
So it
policy.
has been handed over in a plate, and he just refused it.
Absolutely, absolutely. The United States wanted India to be the face of Asia. And it
Mm.
was Nehru who completely messed that up by saying it should go to China. He had this great love for Fabian socialism and China and Russia and all that. Of course, he didn't know that 10 years later he was going to get backstabbed by Mao Zedong and that China would, have a conflict with India in 1962, in which China would have a huge victory over the Indians and things like that. So all of that, there are some reports that the United States offered nuclear weapons to the Indians in the 1950s, and Nehru refused it,
Oh
right?
no.
So, yeah, many of India's modern day geopolitical problems can almost always be tied back to Jawaharlal Nehru's initial stint as the prime minister.
Wow, that's something I never heard of. Okay, that's some great knowledge. Okay, okay. So let's come back to the topic. But again, we have to do these geopolitical series as well. So in the future, we will do it. You guys will be amazed at what we have to share on that area. Okay, so coming back to the bioweapons. Uh, so after 1972, the treaty is there. Now countries are developing. What kind of weapons are available out there? And are there any plans or are there any strategies to defend against them?
Yeah. So, in terms of the offensive plans, obviously, legally they cannot declare
Mm.
that these are offensive plans, but based on the way that these agents work. So, if you take something like anthrax, for example, right, which even terror organizations have used and all that, typically it would be inhalation type anthrax that is used. So anthrax itself, there are some types that affect your gastrointestinal tract. You might have diarrhea for a few days and all that.
So
But
this is called mad cow disease. Same thing.
no, mad cow disease is different from anthrax. Anthrax is a different. So all of this is the difference is in the bacteria. I don't know the scientific name of the various types. So rabbit fever, mad cow disease. There are many of these different bacteria that are used, which have a very high fatality rate when inhaled. Right. So typically,
So they
we are
weaponize it. So they take the normal virus from the nature and they weaponize it. They make it go through. I
yeah,
mean, spread through by
yeah.
inflating it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and this is the major problem with biological weapons, where all of these are already
Inhaling. Sorry.
available in nature. With chemical weapons or nuclear weapons, you need infrastructure to build those. You need equipment to actually process that into the end state. Whereas biological warfare, as with many of the examples that we've seen, where the colonial powers tried to defeat the Native Americans in North America by giving them blankets that were infected with smallpox, right? So now you don't need anything sophisticated for that. So
And by just
biological,
being around them, if they have a cough or a flu or some kind of, the other person have not developed any antibodies or antiviruses for that, so they will get infected and die off, right?
yeah, in fact, most of the Native American population did not die off from war. They died off from the diseases that the settlers brought in because they did not have the natural immunities towards many of those diseases because they were kind of isolated as well. So, in terms of how these weapons might be delivered in modern day warfare, one would be to actually attach it on a missile and to send it. We could always have warheads that are carrying biological agents or chemical agents. But the easier, cheaper way to do it would be to target critical infrastructure. poisoning a city's water system, or poisoning a facility's air ducts, or something like introducing. So let's say I introduced a lot of locusts to destroy all your crops. That is biological warfare. Or let's say you and I are having a conflict, and I know that the refugee population is suffering from malaria and cholera and all that, and I purposely push this refugee population into your territory. That is also a form of biological warfare. About a decade ago, about 15 years ago, South Africa accused Zimbabwe of doing this, of intentionally making sure that the refugees who were coming in were infected with diseases as well. So it's basically up to your imagination. Whatever we can think of, our creativity will allow us to find a way to deliver biological. It can be through something as simple as a handshake, which is why assassinations in particular, historically, has been a favorite for people who want biological weapons, who like biological warfare. So sending in a poisonous snake, mixing poison with your food, mixing poison with your wine, and all that. Many different political assassination techniques of medieval and ancient times were using. If you've seen the first James Bond movie, Dr. No, with Sean Connery, the first ever one in 1960, the Dr. No's people initially tried to kill James Bond using a tarantula, by putting a tarantula into his room when he sleeps. Of course, it's James Bond, so he's not going to get killed by a spider, right? Let's face it. But these were some of the very simple, low cost, but efficient ways in which biological weapons were used. So even in today's era of warfare, you can use many of these extremely low-tech methods, and it's probably going to be these low-tech methods that are actually used, rather than attaching it to a hypersonic missile and all that.
I have 2 points to add to that. I remember that one of North Korea's Kim Jong Un's cousin brothers were killed in Taiwan or Singapore, somewhere that kind of resembles what you said. And there was another movie called The Interview, where 2 journalists from US goes into North Korea to interview Kim Jong Un, and they try to kill him off with a poisonous resin, they call it. So tell me about this poisonous resin, and what are the tactics they have used to kill off his cousin brother in Taiwan or Thailand? I don't remember the exact country.
Okay, so first of all this that I'm about to tell you is speculation, not confirmed fact. So when we look at resin and stuff like that, so these are basically things with which many different chemicals and biological agents can be mixed, and it's also very easy to give it to the target either in the form of a liquid or in the form of a gas. So whether it's the North Korean that you mentioned, or the killing of Russian defectors in Europe, if you remember. So of course, some of it was radiation, some of it was chemical attacks, some of it was biological attacks and all that. They would typically do it by getting into the air ducts, because that's the easiest way. So you find out where that it's, and in all these cases, remember, the target was isolated as well. So when the target is isolated, it's very easy for you to knock them off with a chemical attack or a biological attack, because it would be constrained to them. And the good thing about many of these tactics is that even anthrax, it's not contagious. Of course, if I put out anthrax to 1,000 people, 1,000 people will die. But if you have anthrax and if you are dying from anthrax, that's not really going to be contagious to me, even if I come next to you. So resin and then many of these things are these low-cost biological / chemical agents that you can either deliver through food, or more easily you can just deliver by introducing some of it into the air.
Can you penetrate the skin?
Oh yeah. I mean, so
not from a dart. Obviously, a dart or an injection can do that. I mean,
yeah.
By some surface you touch, can you do that?
So there are certain, so chemical warfare is a lot better than biological warfare. So with chemical warfare, which we can do an entire conversation on, there are these really corrosive, acidic, strong toxins and all that, which have been synthetically created, which are so strong that they can just wipe you off even with a single touch and all that. But as far as biological weapons go, because these are natural components that we are using, they tend to not be that strong. But once again, I mean, look, if you touch one of those poisonous frogs, and if you touch them for too long and it seeps into your skin, you're going to die, right? So even during prehistoric times, there were biological weapons that can kill you if you touch them.
Hmm.
You
Okay.
have to be very careful when you're loading the poison on the dart.
Okay. Okay. So, what are the latest weapons you are familiar with in this space that we should be worried about?
Yeah, so anthrax is the most important thing that we need to be. Anthrax and smallpox, I would say, are the two things that we really need to be worried
Smallpox is
about.
considered that we have cured the entire world of the thing, but they have kept some vials, no, for future
Uh,
development.
In the United States and in Russia, there are labs which do smallpox research and which have the smallpox bacteria in their stockpile. So these are the only two. We don't know about the others. These are the only two countries where it's public knowledge that they actually have smallpox samples. Anthrax, it's dangerous because of how surprisingly easy it is to get. I mean, anthrax is available in
Smallpox is a
nature.
virus, no, not a bacteria.
Yeah, it's a smallpox virus, which what's that guy's name? He kind of cured smallpox. I can't remember his name at the moment, but it was like one of the first proper vaccines. It was one of the first diseases to be eradicated through the use of vaccines and things
Dr.
like that.
Edward Jenner.
Yes. Thank you.
Edward Jenner.
So, and he did it by infecting himself with a very small dose of it and allowing his body to create an immunity and all that. So that was very groundbreaking at that time. And people forget how dangerous smallpox was. 3 or 4 generations ago, that was one of the major killers, which we've now eradicated thanks to widespread uses of vaccines and all that.
Compared to those, COVID is child's play, right?
Yeah, see, the problem with COVID was that COVID's fatality rate was too low rather than too high. So instead of you just getting COVID and dying in 10 days, you
There was
could
enough
live
time
just
for you to spread it.
yeah, and you could not, sometimes you might not, most of the time you would not even know that you actually got it. Of course, then the Delta strain came in and things became different. But the reason that the initial pandemic happened, so if you look at something like SARS or even some more fatal deadly diseases, whenever the disease rate is higher, you can actually control the disease quite easily because people are dropping dead. Whereas here you
You
get
just
COVID.
quarantining them is enough sometimes. In that
Exactly,
case, that's
right?
why
But
Ebola is not a global threat, I believe.
yeah, Ebola cannot be a global threat because the fatality rate is too high. You're not going to be able to spend 2 weeks going wherever you want, spreading it and all that. You're going to see the symptoms much faster and you're going to drop dead much sooner,
Okay.
right? So,
So the
yeah.
holy grail of a bioweapon, an ideal bioweapon would be that it should allow you to have good, I mean, seemingly have good health, so you can travel around and spread it. And then after a considerable amount of time, let's say after 1 month or two, then it suddenly gets worse and you die off.
Yeah. If you're looking for a long-term strategy, because remember, sometimes, so that kind of disease cannot be used in a military engagement. A disease which
Definitely.
is going to have you fine for 2 or 3 weeks and drop dead, then in an actual war, that's not going to really be of use. The way that Hannibal used the snakes to capture the ships and stuff like that. So for a long-term play, as you said, that kind of disease would be ideal. For a short-term play, it would be something which gives you some immediate success on the battlefield, which is where, once again, chemical weapons are more effective for that, like nerve gas,
Mustard gas.
sarin, mustard gas, even cyanide and stuff like that. it's a lot easier for you to get immediate military victories with those. Whereas biological weapons are used more for stealth, assassination, psychological warfare, then destroying a population, like what the Japanese wanted to do when they dropped all those fleas and all that. It was called Unit 731. That
Mm.
was the Japanese unit. It
Let's
was
talk
like,
about that. Let's talk about that in extensive detail. Unit 731 was a very infamous organization. They had bases all over China and occupied territories where they did live mutilations of people, right? So some horrific criminal activities against humanity. So now they have been, I mean, Japan is being pressured by several countries to apologize and for reparations, but they are kind of still denying certain things that have happened. But I believe that also led to some certain scientific findings as well that we would otherwise not be able to discover, right? Because they had some sort of a, I mean, it's not right, but they still had collected some serious amounts of notes and knowledge in regarding to human anatomy and uh, how it defends itself against external incursions. And that knowledge, I believe, has been transferred to US authorities, and in return, they have not litigated the people who were involved in the Japan side. Am I correct in that?
so as in there were many people who were interned and litigated on the Japanese side and all that, but you are true that all that knowledge is with the Americans at the moment. I mean, look, Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan may have been the bad guys in the World War II narrative or whatever, but let's not forget that these were arguably the two most technologically advanced countries in the
At the
Western
time.
Hemisphere. And so much of what we know about modern physics today comes from German scientists in the 1930s, Einstein onwards, right? Nazi Germany was considered the pinnacle of science and technology. Imperial Japan was the only Asian army that could actually defeat European armies. They had that big naval victory over the Russians in 1905. Imperial Japan was the most powerful, without a doubt, the most powerful Asian power of its time, the only Asian power whose military might was on the same level as the Western powers. So yeah, you're right. Many horrific experiments were conducted. They tried to spread a lot of disease. They tried to conduct a lot of experimentation and things like that. They tried to come up with very innovative ways. So they would poison the wells and see how long it took for that to then take out the entire population. So they studied it very scientifically. It was not, people, it's not like the Mongols where it's just a bunch of wild warriors rampaging through a city and burning it all down because they are just these warriors who are living in that fierce thing. This was all done very calmly, very scientifically, in a very ordered and structured way. So yeah, Unit 731, uh, chemical attacks as well, biological attacks is what they were mostly known for. The rape of Nanking, which is a city in China where a
Now
lot
we
of
call
these,
it the Beijing, right? It's Beijing now, no?
it's called Nanjing now.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, it's called Nanjing. So I was actually at the Nanjing War Memorial in 2018 for World Peace Day. The Chinese had the Communist Party had invited people from different countries and all that. And for whatever reason, I got the invite as well, so I just went. You had the Japanese deputy prime minister, if I'm not mistaken, who had come down there and he publicly apologized
Yes.
in front of all the delegates and stuff like that. But as you pointed out, there are still certain things that they don't want to apologize for. But the point is that biological warfare was very systematically used by the Japanese during the Second World War, particularly Unit 731. And to this day, that is the most famous example in modern industrial warfare of systematic bio warfare.
Okay. So we talked about anthrax. What are the other types of things that are currently in circulation, maybe in on research? And what about these cars, electric cars, marketing themselves as biological warfare safe? What's that about? Is that a real thing?
I mean, let's face it, right? What would they do if I smear some poison on the car handle, right? You
I
can't.
think they're talking about some airborne virus or airborne attack.
Okay. So maybe now I personally I would say, look, if you can do that, then you should be advising and selling that technology to militaries around the world, because those guys are desperately going to need it as well. But I don't see
Because they
how
are in the
it.
front line. They are the ones who are most likely to exposed to it, right? Most
Yeah,
likely to be
that's true. But,
exposed.
but you could also argue that maybe regular civilians are the ones who are at the front lines and not
Yeah, that's also,
military installations,
yeah.
right? So because
Okay.
they would obviously, many of them would want to target civilians rather than military institutions and military targets and things like that. But I don't see how a car can be, biological attack proof or whatever. There are just too many ways in which you can introduce a biological agent into a car for that to actually work. As maybe they have filtration systems, maybe what they mean is that our filtration systems are so effective that they can screen anything. But let's face it, right? A parasite that's microscopic or a virus that's microscopic, how
Even
sure?
smaller. Yeah.
Yeah,
Virus are even smaller.
yeah, even smaller. Like, how sure are you that your screening process will protect you from that? So as far as I see it, it's a sales
Sales
tactic.
gimmick marketing. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, so what are the defenses we have against this? You said at the beginning, just prior to the discussion, that our opinion in Sri Lanka, what we have our own understanding of these things, and our opinion is as same as the opinion of an American or a Russian who we consider as more technologically or militarily advanced. But in this, when it comes to biowarfare, our guess as is good as theirs. So why did you say that?
Yeah, because the only defense is you turn in the other direction, you pray to God, and you run. That's the only defense. Evacuation and
So no
quarantine.
countermeasures, no defense against biowarfare.
US soldiers are vaccinated against anthrax, and they are vaccinated against smallpox as well. But that's not going to be practical for a civilian population. You're not going to be able to vaccinate an entire civilian population over an attack that might or might not come. And if you vaccinate them against anthrax, there might be rabbit fever or some. There are endless diseases, right? I mean, coming up with the list itself is futile because there's just so many that are fatal to the human body. So deterrence would be one, where maybe they hope that if you have a stockpile, then the enemy will be worried. However, the problem is that the enemy can just deny responsibility. If a Russian spy agency tomorrow chooses to poison the waters in, let's say, New York or California or something, it's not. It's going to be the Russians denying responsibility and the United States kind of blaming the Russians. So even deterrence is not really going to work. The only thing that has worked so far is basic human constraint. So human beings, for whatever reason, have chosen to be somewhat constrained in their use of biological attacks as time has marched on. And as long as this invisible moral restraint works, we are safe from
It's like
biological.
walking on eggshells.
Yeah, we've been walking on eggshells for a century at this point.
Okay. Um, so anything else that you want to add to this discussion in terms of what I have not, what I have missed to ask you?
Yeah.
Is
So
there
okay.
anything?
So I think one thing maybe I should ask you, right? So now, from a common sense perspective, right? Let's say there was a biological attack on Sri. Let's say at the whatever. What's that mall with the long line to see the Christmas tree and all that?
One goal face.
A one golf face, right? So let's say there's some kind of biological attack at the one golf face where somebody has released anthrax or smallpox or something like that. What would you consider to be a common sense response and reaction to that?
You're putting me on the spot. So whatever I say going to be end up stupid. Okay, so if it's an attack that it should be looking at some sort of a quarantine situation, and I'm also looking at some sort of an evacuation plan, but I'm not sure exactly how to execute and which location. What to do with the ground zero, and what to do with the outside population.
Great. So your answer is the basic answer that the Americans and the Russians and everybody else has as well.
Oh wow.
You quarantine it and you focus on evacuation. Those are the only two things that we have at the moment. So your answer, and which is why I said our analysis of this is
Yes.
as relevant as
Okay.
anyone else's, because they too have no solution against this, right? How do
Mm.
you control ground zero? We have no idea. How do we stop it from spreading if it breaks the quarantine? We have no idea. What are the various kind of choke points at which we can cordon off an entire area to make sure that it doesn't spread? We have no idea, because logistically it's impossible to plan this out. You can have evacuation and quarantining drills and strategies in place, but ultimately the logistics of this will be so complicated that you will only have a 50% chance of that
Mm.
plan actually being pulled off successfully,
Okay,
right?
I can.
So
Okay, for example, I can come up with a theory that a certain kind of bacteria or virus can be destroyed through ultraviolet lighting. So we can equip the moles with ultraviolet lights, but then the enemy would come up with a different strain that would, that would not be affected by ultraviolet light.
yeah,
So
or
there are
the
so
enemy
many
would
options that
yeah, or the enemy would just go to a hospital or somewhere without
without,
those
yeah,
lights.
without those lights.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a very difficult thing to do. Uh, so you tell me, I mean, what kind of like if we can imagine something that is not here today, not technically possible today, but what would be the future look like?
Okay, so they are trying to now look at whether you can create counter biological agents, as
Mhm.
in whether you can release things into the atmosphere. Let's say there's a biological gas attack. Can you now release things into the atmosphere which neutralize that? Kind of like how you would fight a disease, right? Where your white blood cells go after the
Mm.
biological agents, or a kind of like taking a
Mm.
medicine which goes after the parasite that is inside your body. So that's
Mm.
one. The
So it's
the
like nanites, nanometer robots.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. So
Mm.
nanoscience would be a big part of this. And the other major hope is genetic engineering, that
Mm.
at a certain point of time, genetic engineering would become so complex and sophisticated that at birth itself, the embryo can be tweaked for the baby being born to be immune to most diseases in the real world. So, of course, that's going to be quite complicated as well, right? If you want a son who's tall, yeah, tweak the DNA. If you want a daughter with long hair, yeah, tweak the DNA. You want your son to be built for running, yeah, tweak the DNA. So it's going to come up, it's going to come with a lot of social and cultural changes to the way that human beings look at the world as well. So we can go into an entire thing on genetic engineering and all that. But right now, genetic engineering seems to be the only real hope that
Mm.
we can create humans who have a
Mm.
natural level of immunity against biological and chemical weapons. But
So
until
kind of like a super soldier.
yeah, kind of like super soldiers. I have an article on super soldiers for Small Wars Journal. I'll send it to you,
Mm.
and maybe we can discuss
Yeah,
that one of
I
these
can put
days.
a
So
screenshot here and a link in the description.
okay, awesome, awesome. So it was done about 5 years ago. There's a lot more updated stuff, so I might be writing that, revising that again. But there's a lot of useful stuff there. So yeah, if you can come up with genetic problems for biological and chemical attacks, then there's a way out. If not, as I said, turn the other way, pray to God, whether you believe in God or not, utter a prayer and run as fast as you can in the opposite
But
direction.
we can assume that most of these attack would take place or delivered through air. I think that would be the most popular choice for the people who wants to attack some place would go for.
So that would be the easiest way to spread it.
Mm.
But who knows, right? Maybe people will develop some bacteria strain or something like that, which is far more potent when it's in water, where it needs water to kind of maybe replicate, or like a waterborne
Maybe
parasite.
it is spread through air and stays dormant in our bodies. As soon as we come face to face or inhale a different kind of substance, it gets activated.
Okay, I mean, you're giving the kind of Russians and the Americans all kinds of ideas already, right? They're already fantasizing as they listen to all this. Yeah, so before all that happens, we need to find a solution, because what you're saying, countries are actually on the cusp of developing those things where they can react to various things based on their own triggers and all
Do
that.
you see this being an actual threat on a battlefield or something somewhere close by in the near
Yeah,
future?
I think all it takes is for one country to break this invisible moral limit, and after that, it's going to become
Or
normalized.
some terrorist organization to actually do it and put the blame on a country?
Yeah, I mean, that could happen. So we already know that for many groups that have tried to use anthrax in 2000, 2001, 5 or 6 Americans died from an anthrax attack as well. There's the Aum Shinrikyo cult in Japan, which about 20 or 25 years ago, of course, that was chemical, but
That
they
was
released,
subway, no? Subway attack.
yeah, exactly. They released the sarin gas, if I'm not mistaken, into a subway. So
That
it's
guy with the
very,
long beard and he was
yeah,
like
yeah,
meditating.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's very easy to replicate all that with biological weapons as well. So the threat is still very much a real one.
Should we worry as Sri Lankans?
Not particularly, because let's be honest, it would be much easier to target us with a conventional bomb blast or something like that, right? If you want to
Why
maybe,
go to the lens?
yeah, why go to all those lengths and attract unnecessary attention there? So it would also be something that grabs international headlines, and you would make a lot of unnecessary enemies and all that. A
What about
bomb
India and
blast,
Pakistan? I mean, not state-wise. Sometimes Pakistan. I mean, Pakistan is accused of hosting different terrorists and training them by India.
hmm.
So, is there a possibility that kind of attack would happen between those two over the border?
Yeah, there is a possibility. Thankfully, none of the groups there have their hands on that kind of technology. But if they
But you said
do,
it's not tech. It's you don't need technology for that.
yeah, but you need technical know-how, as in you need to know where you can find anthrax in nature. You need to know where you can find some of these ingredients in nature, right? And these guys typically tend to opt for easier methods, because it's not like these guys have very sophisticated biological wings and all that. But the Al Qaeda and all that, as I've kept saying, has used it. It's, as I said, it's just a matter of time.
Or maybe they have tried it, and because they don't know how to handle it, they have died out from that itself.
That's possible as well. I mean, maybe they tried to kind of actually get their hands on something, and it ended up killing them. It's happened. I can't remember the exact instance, but there was a case like this where a cult got its hands on a biological weapon, and they ended up getting destroyed by it because they didn't know how to use it.
Wow. So again, summarizing. So I just want you to elaborate on the things that we have elaborated. So I want you to summarize the today's discussion, and especially focused on that last part that we called about nanites. So yeah, biomedical engineering or biological engineering, genetic engineering can help us in that area in the future. But what about the technical aspect, the nanobots? Where are we on that as the technology progresses? And after that, you can summarize today's discussion.
Yeah, so in terms of nanobots, we are actually very, very deep into that, right? So as you know, nanotechnology is something that everybody is interested in. There's a great deal of investment, there's a great deal of research. Everything from garments manufacturers trying to use nanotechnology to make better shirts,
That you
to,
don't have to wash, or sometimes don't have to press.
yeah, my God, what a convenience that would be, huh? So I
Yes.
can't wait for that. So all
I
the
have
way,
seen one of those shirts actually. I have seen the one that you don't need to wash.
okay. I mean, please, let me know where I can get one of those, right? So So all the way from these low-tech applications to the high-tech applications, we are now seeing nanobots being used. Nanobots are already used for medical applications. So it's just a matter of expanding those capabilities into something that can neutralize a threat as well. So we already have people researching on how nanobots can help with surgery, how nanobots can help with boosting your immunity, how nanobots can help with just helping your body function better. There's a lot of research into all of this already.
Okay.
So we're not that far away from being able to weaponize nanobots against threats.
Okay. So let's put a spin on it like this. So we kind of, without doing genetic engineering, there's a large population. I mean, genetic engineering we can do for newborns, but the people who are born and people who are alive today, it's very difficult for a 8 billion population, or let's say if we take a country, let's say 10 million, even 10 million population, it's really hard to genetically engineer 10 million people. But what we can do is, can't we do something like this? Take a generic nanobot, syringe or an injection, and you put them in your body, and that those nanobots can be programmed on the fly to adapt to any external attack.
So the University of Berkeley is working on that. There are some military laboratories there that's actually working on that, where it would be basically the same as a vaccine, where you are basically injecting nanobots into your body the way that you would inject a vaccine. And instead of that vaccine being protection against one disease, that syringe is actually full of nanobots, which will protect your body from a number of different things.
We should be able to transmit some sort of an identification method to them to identify any new pathogens that enter the bloodstream.
Yeah,
if that can be done,
that
we are
would
done.
come under the control of a separate command center somewhere, which would have to be monitoring these things. The question then becomes, how do we protect civilian populations when we are entering? So if the Americans go into Afghanistan, let's say, or Iraq, it's not enough if their own soldiers are protected. The local civilian population needs to be protected from Al-Qaeda's or ISIS attacks as well. So in poor countries where we are trying to maybe conduct peacekeeping operations.
So currently nanobots are expensive, that's what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's also impractical. I mean, even vaccines, look, polio, for whatever reason, still exists in certain countries. It's a shame, but it still exists in certain countries because they don't want to take the syringe. They don't want to take the vaccine, and there's lack of access and other reasons as well.
They don't want to take? What do you mean?
In like in Iran and Pakistan are two places where polio still continues to persist. And many of those people, they refuse the vaccine. They feel that it's either they feel that it's a Jewish conspiracy to stop Muslims from having babies, or they're just scared of that invasive process. Look at the controversy that the COVID vaccine generated. You and I both know how easy it is for conspiracy theories and also for pharmaceutical companies to get up to a lot of mischief as well. We can't deny that either. We can't deny that there's a politics behind vaccines as well. But once again, it would be impossible to protect each and every individual using that syringe strategy. It would be much easier, they feel, when they move into poorer countries and peacekeeping operations and all that, to be able to release something into the atmosphere where it can take on the external agents.
But isn't there a talk about people having weird after effects of having a COVID vaccine? And some crazy diseases.
So many. I mean, not just weird, like actual deaths, like chronic pain, all kinds of chronic conditions and all that, which is why, as I was saying, there's a certain politics behind the vaccine industry as well. Right. And this criticism of vaccines, by the way, has existed for a long time, where people have linked it with the autism. So, for example, countries where vaccination rates are high, autism rates also tend to be proportionally high.
Have, has it been confirmed in a study or just saying?
See, there are many people who claim that their study proves it, but you're never going to get, because of, once again, the politics behind this, you're not going to get scientific journals and all.
When you even if you do come up with a potent scientific study, the other side going to fund a different set of professors and universities and get some contradicting results.
Yeah, or they would call you a conspiracy theorist, or they would
just
get
kill
the
off, or just do a
yeah.
biological attack and kill off that person.
Yeah, I mean, let's be. It's a lot easier to humiliate them than to kill them. So typically, they just try to humiliate
nowadays.
them. So,
nowadays, now it's humiliation is easy. You know, in earlier days when the communication is not this big, we have heard of assassinations. Even in Sri Lanka, there was a famous professor called Senaka Bibile was accused. I mean, it's an open case and very popular one where he got killed by one of his best friends due to some organization responsible because he exposed some stuff like that. Okay, so I'll let you summarize and we'll finish off today's discussion.
Okay, so in summary, what we need to remember is that unfortunately there are no real defenses against a widespread biological attack other than this invisible moral leash that humans have put on themselves. And the instant this leash is removed by somebody, we have no idea what the chain reaction is going to be. And the most important thing we need to remember about biological weapons is that this is the easiest and yet the most low-cost way in which large-scale damage can be perpetrated. It is the
if you can get your hands on them. If you can get your hands.
Yeah, if you can get your hands on it. But once again, there are many biological agents that are available in nature. So I can recommend a book known as The Future of Violence by a Harvard professor called Gabriela Bloom. It's quite old. It came out in 2015 or 16. But in that book, she maps out many of the threats, technological threats that are going to come in the future over the next 20 to 30 years. And she has an entire chapter dedicated to biological warfare. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, I would recommend you guys get Gabriela's Bloom, The Future of Violence.
Okay, so that's it for biological warfare, and we will discuss this topic in the future as the need arises, and we are going to bring in some more exciting topics, especially in the geopolitical area. Since our president is visiting India now, maybe we have to discuss about that in a future episode very recently. And also we are in the next episode we probably meet physically and we'll talk about 5th generation jets. So I would like to ask you, okay, I mean, why did you pick your career as something like this to discuss defense and I know that as a consultant you are going to make some money and all that, but not that. But what is the passion? What is the purpose behind this?
So, when I was about 12 years old, I started reading this British thriller writer called Frederick Forsyth. And then I started reading a bunch of other guys, Robert Ludlum, Tom Clancy and all that. When I was a teenager, I was completely immersed in spy, espionage, warfare fiction. And I always found that to be really, really cool. And for whatever reason, because I grew up reading all that, I had no idea that I was training myself to think along these lines at all. It was only once I was in my early and mid 20s that I realized that my ability to absorb knowledge in terms of security and geopolitics seemed to be a lot more than any of my other peers. And my ability to create my own opinions and to rationally and critically analyze the prevailing wisdom and all that, for whatever reason, that just came very easily to me. So the field
and to convince someone else that you are good at that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all about the game, right? I wasn't able to convince anybody that I would be a good lawyer. And once you have a law degree, the best thing to do is to find something else that you can bluff people with. So fortunately, I've spent a good 10 to 15 years now bluffing my way through this. Yeah.
Cool. So it's quite exciting to have you with us on our channel, and I'm looking forward to have dynamic discussions like this in the future, Nilan. And to all of those who are viewing this, please make sure to share this, subscribe to the channel, because we will be doing this English podcast as a separate one for the foreseeable future, discussing various geopolitical and military subjects. And if anything you want to add to this discussion, please, there is the comment section. Go and encourage us to do this stuff more. Okay, then thank you, Nilan. We'll meet you next week. Take care.
Thank you. It's been fun as always.